Welcome to our podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Sam.
I'm Katie.
And we're filming today from the traditional, unceded, and unsurrendered Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. We're grateful to have the opportunity to learn on this land, and as settlers, we acknowledge our responsibility to learn about and to contribute to reconciliation in Ottawa and in Canada generally. An important goal of this podcast is to bridge the Western and Indigenous perspectives on healthcare and overall well-being.
So before we begin, we just wanted to provide a content warning. In this podcast, we will be talking about death and methods of dying, which include suicide. We will also be discussing mental health and symptoms of various mental health illnesses. In the description of the podcast, there's a list of accessible mental health resources available, such as the Canada-wide Suicide Crisis Helpline, which is accessible 24/7 by calling 988.
So just to introduce ourselves a little bit more, we're two Master of Social Work students, and we've taken on this podcast as part of our education and part of a social justice project as well. So we're hoping to talk about medical assistance in dying in Canada and how it affects individuals, families, and communities who are impacted by mental health, physical health, and socioeconomic factors. And just talking more about the nuance that exists in this policy and trying to bring light to the different perspectives that are being brought forward now. So the Government of Canada defines medical assistance in dying, also known as MAiD, as a process that allows someone who is found eligible to be able to receive assistance from a medical practitioner, like a physician or a nurse practitioner, in ending their life. So Katie's going to speak in more detail next about what those specific eligibility criteria are. And this next section is going to get into specific Canadian legislation. So we're referencing directly from the Government of Canada current guidelines as of November 2024.
So as Sam said, medical assistance in dying, also known as MAiD, this is outlined by Bill C-14, which was introduced in 2016 and highlights that individuals need to meet the following eligibility criteria to receive MAiD. So there's quite a few. So individuals need to be at least 18 years old and mentally competent. They also need to be eligible for health services funded by a province, territory, or federal government. Individuals also must need to suffer from a grievous and irremediable medical condition, and they also must need to make a voluntary request for MAiD and provide informed consent.
Can you speak a little bit more about that specific criteria about a grievous and irremediable medical condition? What does that actually mean?
Yeah, for sure. So the Government of Canada defines this as individuals who have a serious illness, disease, or disability, in that they are in an advanced state of decline that cannot be reversed. It also means that they experience unbearable physical or mental suffering from their illness, disease, disability, or a state of decline that cannot be relieved under conditions that they deem acceptable.
Okay. And I think some of these criteria were extended under Bill C-7, which happened in February 2020, and that was informed by the Quebec Superior Court decision in a specific case of Truchon versus Canada, as well as recent discussions on MAiD in Canada, just generally. So Bill C-7 resulted in redefining the MAiD criteria. And so this decision found areas of the original law, which, as you said, started in 2016, to be unconstitutional. So this included the reasonably foreseeable nature of death criteria. So in removing this criteria and instead creating the grievous and irremediable medical condition, discussions sparked about expanding the MAiD requirements, right? And this also includes people who suffer solely from a mental illness. The eligibility date for including people who suffer solely from a mental illness was supposed to be implemented this past March 2024. However, the government has now delayed this until March 2027. So this was decided in order to allow more time for provinces to prepare their healthcare systems as appropriate and practitioners to participate in training and become familiar with the available supports, guidelines, and standards. One important piece of that training are different safeguards that are in place. So before a medical practitioner can administer MAiD, they have to satisfy certain criteria. So this includes, for the patient or client, having 2 independent medical assessments, so making sure that their condition has been approved or assessed by 2 either physicians or nurse practitioners in Canada. They also have to have a written request signed by an independent witness, and they know that they must be able to withdraw their request at any time. And then they have to provide final consent before receiving MAiD. Additionally, they can give advance consent in a scenario where somebody might lose capacity to do so in their near future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what Sam kind of just explained was the first track of MAiD that can be taken, but there's also now track 2, which is defined for people whose death are not reasonably foreseeable. So there are more safeguards for track 2 that I'll discuss. So the safeguards for if the death is not reasonably foreseeable include having one of the 2 medical practitioners who provide the assessment must have expertise in the medical condition that is causing unbearable suffering. Another safeguard is that patients must be informed of available means to relieve their suffering and offered consultations with professionals who provide services, including where appropriate. So some of these services might be palliative care, community services, counseling services, and mental health and disability support services. So patients also must have discussed reasonable available means to relieve their suffering with their practitioners and all parties involved, so meaning the patient and any doctors who are involved with the assessments, all must have to agree that the patient seriously considered these options. The assessment also must take a minimum of 90 days unless the patient is at immediate risk of losing their capacity to consent. So that happens, the assessment can kind of be decreased to a shorter time frame than 90 days. And finally, the last one is that right before receiving MAiD, the practitioner must give patients an opportunity to withdraw your request and ensure that they express consent to receive MAiD one final time. So the expansion of MAiD criteria to include death that is not reasonably foreseeable has introduced the topic of mental health as a sole underlying medical condition, which means that individuals who suffer, say, just solely from depression, PTSD, schizophrenia, bipolar, they could access MAiD to relieve their suffering.
Mm-hmm. This shift has been super contentious, especially among both academics and researchers, as well as current people in the field and just Canadian community members, because who decides what an irremediable mental illness is, right? What does that actually look like for community members? And so that's the main topic we're going to focus on in our next 2 podcasts, is kind of pulling at the nuance in this shift that is coming as of 2027 now, and talking about what the different implications are going to be, both on healthcare professionals, so future social workers, people on MAiD teams, as well as people who want to access this service. Before we end this episode, we wanted to just take a moment to recognize again that both Katie and I are current social work students, so we don't have practice experience in MAiD. We're not coming into these podcasts as experts. We're trying to position ourselves as experts, and so we think it's really important that we stated that before we get into more discussions that aren't so closely tied to the legislation.
Yeah, I think it's really important to note that we are no means by experts in this field. We're so just really interested in the topic, in that we really pulled all of our information by doing research, trying to incorporate as many different perspectives and opinions that we could find online. And we do recognize the barriers that poses, not having someone with lived experience talk about MAiD or an expert in the field come and talk about MAiD. So we just really wanted to note that this is just our experience of researching the topic, and we are by no means experts.
This is an area that we want to continue to learn and grow in, and we hope that by pulling in as many voices as possible, we're going to be able to provide a well-rounded view. But this is definitely coming from a place of interest and a place of growth and education for us. Thanks!